What's good? It's Woog. It is now official. And I mean it's official. Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford is going to go down on July 29th at T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. Boy, oh boy. Like, I wasn't going to do any long videos. I did do a short when Coppinger just dropped the rumor a couple days ago, or said that it was agreed upon, right? But we had seen finalized in the past, and I had done content on the fight after it was finalized, because remember, heading into the weekend, we thought that it was more or less a done deal. They had a date, or at least a supposed date. I think it was in November, and then the deal ended up not going through, and then Terence Crawford ended up fighting David Avanesian and so forth, right? What caused me to stay hopeful, and again, I didn't drop any long content. I did do a 1-minute video just talking about Coppinger's recent report, and I also mentioned Dan Rayfield's rebuttal saying until it's signed, there is no deal, right? But we have since seen confirmation from both fighters, and we've seen that PBC style flyer. We've seen some evidence, and then we saw Michael Benson's and different people's reports saying it is now official. So I think we're going to talk about this now, at least a little bit. So I'm going to do multiple videos, going forward as we lead up to the fight date. But one of the things that kept me hopeful about this fight actually being made was that Spence versus Thurman was never announced. Like, we would see week after week, month after month, and there would be no announcement of a fight that we were told was gonna basically be Errol Spence's next fight in lieu of the fight against Terence Crawford happening, and we just never got that announcement. So then we also got pretty much silence from both fighters. They were both kind of laying low about, making any declarations. Like, there was just really none of that. There was not a lot spoken about them. People were suggesting or theorizing that, okay, but wait, they're going to announce it during the, this fight or that fight. There were several fight dates, including the Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia fight. Well, no announcement was made, so it's like, wait a second, what is going on? But because of the silence, and because there was nothing else scheduled, especially for Errol Spence Jr., because we just saw Terence Crawford fighting in December, right, when he scored that really beautiful knockout of David Avanesian. But the fact that there was no Errol Spence Jr. fight scheduled really had me believing, like, man, I really think that they're just quietly negotiating in the back and actually getting this one done. And here we are. So, I've been back and forth on this fight. I'm just going to give some quick thoughts. And I just want to say that I'm ecstatic that this fight is being made. Earlier, just a couple months ago, I was saying that, Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia is the biggest fight of the year. And then recently I said that on paper, Devin Haney versus Vasily Lomachenko might be the best matchup of the year. Well, both of those things, because this fight is now made, are probably second biggest and maybe second best, because we've been wanting this in the boxing world. We've been wanting Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford for 2-3 years. Some would suggest more. Now, I'm not certain that it's going to outsell Gervonta Davis versus Ryan Garcia. That was a star-studded fight, right? They both had names that you could say exceeded their resumes, especially Ryan Garcia. But this is the boxing fans' fight. This is the one that we've been wanting. This is two undefeated champions at welterweight. These two guys I've had in my, at least two of them in my top 3, right? 2 out of my top 3 for like the last couple of years at least have included Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford. Whether I had Canelo at 1, or at different times Usyk, or now you're in a way. Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford more often than not land as 2 of my top 3 pound for pound fighters in the sport. And in terms of my opinion on how this fight is going to play out, when Terence Crawford was a lightweight and then a super lightweight, junior welterweight 140, and then just moving up to 147, I was always thinking I would take Errol Spence over Terence Crawford. I mean, I just seen Errol Spence when he was on the Rampage, knocking out Leonard Bundu, Chris Algieri, finally earning the IBF belt. I said finally like he wasn't young when he earned that IBF belt against Kell Brook. But that was the one that did it for me. And then obviously you saw him, a few fights later fighting Sean Porter. Remember him dominating Mikey Garcia, beating Danny Garcia, and then obviously collecting that 3rd belt against Ugas. The whole run up to, I would say, maybe up until the point point Terence Crawford beat Shawn Porter, I was leaning Errol Spence Jr. over Terence Crawford. I just was, and it was no slight to Terence Crawford. I just thought that Errol Spence was stronger at 147, more proven at 147. I thought that he had the punching power advantage. I thought that he had a lot of advantages. Well, you know, one devastating car accident and a detached retina later, and another car accident that resulted in some leg injury. You know, he might be 100% recovered from all of those things, or at least from, you know, one or two of those three incidents or injuries. He might, you know, be 99, 98%, but that is a lot to happen to the body, to your eye, to your psychology, having to endure and go through those different events. And there are some people who say, man, what are you talking about? These had no and have no ramifications or impact on Errol Spence Jr. I'm saying, I mean, yes, he has performed greatly in his last couple of fights since that devastating car accident, and he beat Ugas, stopped Ugas. I mean, a lot of people who thought he was going to beat Ugas probably didn't think he was going to stop Ugas, but yeah, he did that after the detached retina. But there was that moment where he turned his back and kind of went towards the ropes and sank into the ropes in that fight against Ugas that kind of had me wondering, And I know online boxing analyst Richard Dwyer also said that that moment had him wondering, So for most of this time, most of this lead up to Spence Crawford, I was always leaning Spence. But then the more I thought about it, and then when I was talking with my boy Drew about it, he was mentioning, you know, just the fact that Terence Crawford is the guy who's just more likely to hit you with the punch that you don't see, to mix up his punch patterns, to basically double up with one hand or feint with one hand and then throw with the other, or obviously to switch stances like he does in a lot of his fights and like he did against Kell Brook in the beginning of the third round after arguably dropping the first two rounds, switch stances in the third round, knocked Kell Brook out in the fourth round with that lead right hand. Wasn't quite a hook, wasn't quite a jab, but it caught Kell Brook in a weird moment, in a weird place that had Kell Brook off balance and reeling into the ropes, and that was about it for Kell Brook. And then you couple that with Terence Crawford's performance against Shawn Porter, and yes, Terence Crawford, in my opinion, loses rounds against a lot of different fighters. I thought, you know, Shawn Porter was winning several rounds against Crawford, but then again, Shawn Porter also had a razor thin loss against Errol Spence Jr. And it was largely because of that knockdown in the late rounds. But, you know, I've seen Terence Crawford lose a couple or a few rounds against a few fighters, right? But it just seems like he's the one where at any particular moment, he could just catch you with that punch that you don't see, and it changes everything. I feel like in this Spence versus Crawford matchup, he is going to be the person who, if somebody's going to turn things around with one punch or with one combination, it's going to be him. To where, you know, Errol Spence could be up on the scorecards 4 rounds to 2 or 5 rounds to 3 and then get caught in the 10th round and everything changes. I don't see the same thing happen on the flip side of that. I think that for Errol Spence to win, he's got to win in a very Errol Spence way where he starts working you over. And yes, he does outbox you as well, right? He can sweet science you. And maybe he does end up winning a 12-round decision by outboxing Terence Crawford over the course of 12 rounds and perhaps winning a 116 to 112, 115, 113 type of decision. Or perhaps he starts working Terence Crawford over, kind of beating him up, doing a lot of damage to the body, working on the inside, kind of backing Terence Crawford up into the ropes. Maybe he could win it in that kind of a way and eventually either drop or maybe even stop Terence Crawford. But that would be a very Errol Spence way of doing it. I don't see Errol Spence suddenly catching Terence Crawford with an uppercut and dropping him kind of out of nowhere. I can, again, see Terence Crawford doing something like that to Errol Spence. We've just seen it several times where everything changes at a moment's notice. So, I just wanted to express how ecstatic I am that Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford is being made. I can't wait to do further analysis, further breakdowns on this one as we lead up to the fight day. But give me your early thoughts on Spence versus Crawford. There's a lot to unpack, a lot to digest, a lot to process. And yes, Terence Crawford's age is a big concern. He's going to turn 36 years old in September. So just think about where other great welterweights, what they were doing at 36 years old. Now, I know that Terence Crawford keeps supreme care of himself. He's always in shape. He doesn't mess around and he doesn't abuse himself substance-wise. So yes, he is a gym rat and he lives that lifestyle. But 35, 36 is still 35, 36, right? So yes, I am concerned about Errol Spence's accumulation of injuries and wear and tear. He's been in some tough fights. Even that fight against Ugas was a difficult fight. And not to say that, Errol Spence has gotten beaten up badly in several fights. He hasn't. He's pulled away on the scorecards, if not stopped most of his opponents. But yeah, the Kell Brook fight was tough. Yeah, the Sean Porter fight was tough. I mean, Sean Porter fights are tough for anybody. Yeah, even the Danny Garcia, if you rewatch that, you might have a different impression than what you think you remember from Spence versus Danny Garcia. So I am worried about, on the Errol Spence side, I am worried about the accumulation of damage over the years. And, Errol Spence is no spring chicken either. And then obviously the accidents, the retina tear and so forth. I'm like, what happens when he gets blasted in the eye, by Terence Crawford? How is he going to react to that? I don't know. It's it's something to think about. But I am also concerned about Terence Crawford, just from a performance standpoint, at the age of 35, moving on to 36, not too far from 36 years old. Yes, Terence Crawford did look great against Avanesian. Yes, he did stop Sean Porter in his fight before that. But both of these guys, more or less, have been fighting like one time a year. You know what I mean? Like, neither of these guys have been on that, and people forget this. Even older Floyd Mayweather was fighting like 2 times a year. He would always do the May fight and then the September fight. Crawford and Spence, for at least the last few years, or most of the last few years, have been doing one fight per year. So that's another thing to consider. Just because Terence Crawford looked good in his last fight, we can't just take that for granted and assume that he's going to be the exact same guy entering this next fight. But yeah, let me know your early thoughts on Spence versus Crawford. I'm just overjoyed that this fight is finally, it is official, right? Let me know if I'm wrong. It looks official. I've just been seeing a whole bunch of super near official articles or posts, right, on different social media platforms, on Boxing Scene and all that. And both fighters are selling merchandise, so I think it's official. But let me know what your thoughts are. And also, what does this mean for Keith Thurman? He's just been on the sidelines, and now that he's got this news, does he retire? Does he fight again? I just don't know what's next for one time. And it's just a shame that after that run that he went on, right, when he was just at his best, when he had beaten Sean Porter, then beat Danny Garcia, but then he took that layoff, and we never got that same Keith Thurman again. Every fight that he's had since, he's been good, and he's performed pretty well. Even in his, decision loss versus Manny Pacquiao, I just wish we could have kept that Keith Thurman that was peaking at that time, because I would have really wanted to see how he would do against Errol Spence Jr. and Terence Crawford. But yeah, let me know your thoughts about all that in the comments. Please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Wood. Thanks for tuning in.